being here this evening. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Irfan Nuruddin. I'm a new faculty member here in the School of Foreign Service. Just arrived. I'm affiliated with the Asian Studies program and will hold the Althani Chair in Indian Politics. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm very excited for this event today as a way, of course, of also reaching out to the broader Georgetown and DC community. And I'm very grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Khemka and Mrs. Ishwaran for making the time to help us have this event. Of course, no event of this sort happens quickly, right? It has been the diligent effort of a remarkable set of Georgetown undergraduates, and in particular Mr. J. Tirodkar, who I don't actually see because he's probably doing something important outside, right? Jay has been working with the Khemka Foundation and in particular tGELF, which you'll hear a great deal about over the next hour. And is one of the tGELF young people that Shiv is going to be telling us about. With a set of undergraduates here, he will be starting the tGELF campus club. They started the Georgetown-India dialogue that has already brought to campus Mr. Jairam Ramesh last month in October, and at least two other pretty high-profile events. So there's a lot of energy here, and it's all coming from our remarkable students, and I just want to make sure that we recognize that in particular. We also have a lot of institutional support. We have this beautiful space of Riggs Library, thanks to Tom Banchoff, the Vice Provost for Global Engagement. We have funding for the reception that will follow from Asian Studies, from Global Human Development, and again from the Georgetown-India. I want to recognize a couple of the people who are joining us here today, and Mr. Beck and Mrs. Beck have joined us. They were here earlier today for the board meeting of the Beck Center, named after their generous donation for social impact. We're going to be hearing about a lot of social impact over the next half an hour as well, but I want to just recognize and thank you for all you've done for Georgetown. Mrs. Khemka is also here with us. She's a trustee of tGELF and does a great deal of work for the organization. And also with us is Mrs. Gauri Ishwaran, who is the CEO of tGELF. She is a remarkable educationist in her own right. She was awarded the Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian award by the government of India for the work she's done promoting education in India. This is just a remarkable group of individuals in the audience, and it is matched only by the remarkable individual who is the focus of our conversation today. Mr. Khemka needs very little introduction to this group. He wouldn't be here if his reputation did not precede him. I want to highlight in particular the work he's done in education, both through tGELF but also through his support of institutions of higher learning. His commitment to his alma maters at Brown and at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School are just remarkable, and he sits at the very highest levels on their board and at the President's Council of those institutions. After he has a chance to tell us a little bit about tGELF, he'll be joined in conversation by Professor Shireen Joshi, who is also a member of the School of Foreign Service and in the Global Human Development Program. For those of you who don't know Shireen, you should. Shireen does remarkable work on India as right now a very neat project on the quality of rivers and how those affect child mortality in India. She is a native of Rajasthan, has a PhD in economics from Yale, has worked extensively with the World Bank and USAID, and now is teaching in the GHD program. And I think the points of conversation, even earlier this afternoon, we were talking about the various ways in which Georgetown might help in terms of thinking about the leadership curriculum that has been developed at tGELF, and thinking about neat research ideas thanks to Shireen's initiative about how we might in fact grow that agenda even further. But without further ado, let me thank Mr. Khemka for being here and hand the floor to him.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's wonderful to have all of you here in this beautiful room. So even if I say something that's not very wise, all the aura around me will make it seem wise, I hope. That's why we chose this location. I see so many friends in the audience: Alberto, Maria, Rebecca, Nargis. I see Tanvi there hiding behind. Mohan. Mohan was the head of our foundation in India for many, many years. And with Ms. Ishwaran, the two of them were really my mentors and guides. Helped us create anything we've done. Mohan's now back here in the US doing interesting things. And it's really a pleasure to have all of you here. And I really want to thank Jay for all his work in putting this all together. He's done a tremendous job working with Irfan and the team here, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. I was asked to talk a little bit about what we do with the foundation, with tGELF. something I'm reasonably passionate about. I decided when I turned 40 that when I turned 50, I wanted to spend half my time on something that was other than my business. Because I'm from a business family, I spent my whole life focusing on business, and I decided when I turned 50, I wanted to spend half my time on our foundation activity. Given that, I felt I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. Giving money to programmatic things is a nice thing to do, but it wasn't something that I was passionate about. I felt that I wanted to do something which would test my entrepreneurial skills and would help me to really create something that would be aligned to things I felt deeply passionate about and things where I could engage and be excited to wake up every morning. And I'm delighted to say I'm there. I turned 52 years ago, and now I'm spending half my time on this work, working with Mrs. Ishwaran, my wife, and the team at tGELF, that are doing a wonderful job. When I was at Brown University many years ago, and I see Amelia and some others from Brown here, Rebecca, just graduated from Brown. I had a wonderful experience at Brown, and I did a course called Philosophy of Education. And in that course, I realized that the Western educational system that has developed in the last few hundred years was very focused on the external world. And the inner world was expected to develop in a slightly automated manner in terms of sports, in terms of other things like that. Whereas if you look back to our ancient traditions in India or in China or in Japan, the Zen traditions and other traditions, there was actually a scientific way of developing the inner world. And I felt it was a one-engine plane that was flying, and we needed to rebalance that. So that was something that was a little idea that was born when I was 19, 20 years old. And I felt that one day I'd like to see a curriculum that was more balanced in terms of the external world and the inner world. Obviously, at schools 100 years ago, religious education would do that, moral science would do that, and each tradition would work on the inner world and a life of love, forgiveness, compassion, and all those other things. But the modern educational system, becoming secularized, had taken a lot of that out of the system, leaving us with a big focus on STEM, on literacy, and on functionality, on success, but leaving out a lot of the other things that I think make life meaningful and whole. Anyway, that was just an idea. I then moved and lived in Latin America for 3 years, went back to Wharton, did my MBA, Masters in Portuguese, International Studies, with a specialization in Portuguese. Then I moved to Russia, lived in Russia for 22 years, worked in Africa, worked in China, worked in the Middle East, and had a life that took me all over the planet. And the thing that impressed me most during those voyages was leaders. Great leaders made a great difference. And poor leaders were a disaster. So leadership in its fullness was something that I looked at and became more and more intrigued by. So 10 years ago when we decided to start tGELF, I felt that the thing I was passionate about was real leadership. What is it? How can one search for, nurture, develop and train great leaders? So the first question came, what is leadership? Because we all talk about leadership all the time. And leadership, if you go to a bookstore, if you go to Barnes & Noble and you look at the bookstore leadership section, 85% of the books in that section are about success, are about material success, how to achieve success in the material external world. Yes, there's a little bit about one's internal world, but it's kind of by the by, and the purpose of it is success in the external world. The success in the inner world is not an end in itself. And I felt that was a mistake. If you look at great leaders like Gandhi, success in the inner world was their compass, was their anchor, was much more important to them than success in the outer world. And I felt that we had great towering figures like Gandhi to learn from, and I didn't feel we were really learning enough. So starting with that, we started to define what we meant by leadership. So leadership was all the qualities we can talk about as leadership, the 85% of those books in the Barnes & Noble store. That's important. leaders have to have those skills, and ability to communicate, ability to lead people, ability to convince, ability to cajole, ability to have vision, ability to execute, and all those other things. So that was a fundamental pillar of our vision for leadership. But is that enough? Well, I felt that there were a lot of people who talked about leadership or in positions of leadership who talked a lot but didn't do very much. And so I felt that really you wanted people with a bias for action, people that did things, even if at the risk of making mistakes, failing, but people who took the risk to actually do things. A kind of entrepreneurial spirit I felt was very important in great leaders. So that was the second pillar, a bias for action. But if you look at leaders in history, look at Hitler and Stalin, they both had leadership qualities and they had a bias for action. So clearly that was not enough. Something was missing. And we felt that, okay, the third pillar then is ethics. People that are ethical, people that are moral in some way, whatever their religious tradition or spiritual tradition, people that have a conscience and that don't want to hurt other people, do unto others as you want done unto yourself, and those types of maxims, who actually live that kind of a life rather than just talk about it. So we felt ethics was a fundamental pillar. But was that enough? So we felt, okay, leadership, a bias for action, and ethics, that makes a great leader. And as we thought about that, we realized that's not enough. You can have leadership, ethics, and a bias for action, but you can be selfish. You can care about your town, your university, your company, your family, and be very ethical, have a bias for action, and be a leader, but be fundamentally, in some way, small-minded and selfish. So to be a great leader required one more quality, and that quality was the quality of altruism, caring about others more than one cared about one's own small mind view, and feeling we were part of the human family in some deep and spiritual integrated way. The way Gandhi felt that, or Mandela felt that, through his Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Just the thought that someone could spend 27 years in jail, be beaten and abused and come out and have a process to forgive and forget, it's just astounding. Which is why South Africa didn't descend into the violence it could have. But you needed leaders of that ilk and that capacity to do that. Mother Teresa coming from Romania and ending up on the streets of Calcutta, serving. So where was that leadership? So we felt that actually at schools around the world that leadership exists. In little children, in young children, who are by nature altruistic, by nature ethical, by nature have leadership skills, and by nature have a bias for action. But the school systems we've developed over the last few hundred years create a sense of isolation for these young people, where they become loners. And for them to actually stand out with those values is very difficult. So what they do is they retreat, and either they go and do something and become an artist or become a professor or something where the battle is not so direct, but few of them are willing to take on the direct battle of leading in politics or in business because the challenges are too hard and the moral decisions one has to make would require great compromises that they're probably not willing to make. So as we took that assumption and we said, when we look for great swimmers, we don't assume that a great swimmer is suddenly going to appear at the Olympics. We start when they're young, we watch them over years, we train them systematically, and then we give them a chance to compete at a certain level. And I said, why don't we do the same thing with leadership, with real leadership? So we created a curriculum with Mrs. Ishwaran, we worked very hard, we created a team, created a curriculum about 9 years ago, worked with Columbia University Teachers College, with Harvard University School of Education, tested that curriculum, and the purpose of the curriculum was to fit into any school curriculum and emphasize and highlight these four values: leadership, ethics, altruism, and a bias for action. To try and do two things. Number one, to lift the discourse about leadership. So when young people talked about leadership, they didn't mean leadership with a small L, but they meant leadership with a big L. And number two, to attract people that were deeply committed to a life of real leadership to us and to each other, so that they wouldn't feel alone, and so that they could actually build their strengths together. We now have 1 million children in our program in 11 countries, and it started in class 8, and now it starts in KG. We are in the best schools. We start in India, so we're in the best schools in India, and then we're in rural schools, and we're in orphanages, for example. So we are across the range. Of course, the bulk of what we did, because we started early, was kind of at the top half of the pyramid, but we're now moving down to the bottom of the pyramid as well. What we realized as we started the program was, by class 8, the bottom of the pyramid is being lost. So we had to start much earlier. Intervention had to start much earlier. We train the teachers, and we look for young people who have an affinity for leadership, ethics, altruism, and the bias for action. What does that mean? How do you do that? Because is there some science to it? And unfortunately, I'm sure there are ways that it could be made more and more scientific. But at the moment, it's about training the teachers to look out for young people that exhibit certain behaviors and values. So the child who will go to the teacher and say, "Ma'am, you gave me 9 out of 10 on my exam. You should have given me 6 out of 10 because you gave me 3 marks too many." That child is naturally ethical. The child doesn't need to be taught about ethics. The child who walks by the beggar on the street and every day, instead of saying, "Oh, poor beggar," or ignoring the beggar, takes half their tiffin or all their tiffin and gives it to the beggar every day. That's a behavior pattern which shows altruism and altruistic behavior. So we're looking for young people that have and exhibit these kinds of behaviors. And then in class 10 and 11 and 12, we engage them in social work. So actually, even much younger, they're engaged in social work. But once they reach class 11 and 12, we select a smaller subset of people that are committed to this kind of life, and we expect them to do more service. Because in doing service, actually one really sees if they can walk the talk or if they're only talking the talk. And in class 12 then, we select a few of these young people and we support them. I'll talk again about both sides of this equation. So the first side is the 1 million children who are in the program. And we hope to make that 10 million, 100 million and more over the next coming years. The purpose of that is we believe that changing the discourse about leadership at schools at a young age is very, very important. And what's really nice is to see that it's working. So we got a call from the principal of one of our schools in Chennai, and she told us that the way students are now selecting their leaders at the school is no longer the way they were doing it 5 years ago. 5 years ago, they were selecting on the basis of who is the most popular, who is the best sportsman, who is the most good-looking. Whereas now they're asking, is that leader ethical? Is that leader altruistic? And do we want them as a leader? So the implications of that for civic engagement, for democracy in our country, if one takes a 20-year view, and if one can actually create this kind of a change at a mass level, is huge. Because the people will choose leaders of a different caliber, hopefully. The second part of what we do is actually building a sort of marine core of service. And in that process, we select, having watched these young people for 5 years, the best young people who are committed to ethics, altruism, leadership, and a bias for action. And we then give them a platform to grow and to contribute. So we have now 100 of these young people in the US at the top schools in the US, including Georgetown. Some of them are here. Jay is one of them. And we have many in England because of our traditions of studying in England and the US from India, and many of them at the top schools in India. The foundation has spread now to 11 countries. India was the place where we started. We're now in Nepal, Pakistan, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, so all our neighbors. We're in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, and we're expanding to that region. We're in West Africa, Nigeria, Gabon, Angola. These are places where our company has worked, where we have some connectivity, and we felt let's start in places where we know people and we can start with some early successes. But for us, a critical partner is the US in terms of what we do. And why do we send so many of these young people to the US? We send these people to the US because we actually believe that the best of what the US has to offer is extremely important for these young people. The sense of meritocracy, the sense of tolerance towards diversity, the sense of a certain set of values and ethics in terms of how one conducts oneself, a sense of entrepreneurship and the attitude of can-do. All these things are things we want these young leaders to imbibe, and not just through watching TV serials, but by actually being here and engaging in the community here. And we think it's a very important part of the training of these young people. People often ask me, do you want these people to come back to India? And I say, and I tell the young people in the foundation as well, that I really don't care where they go, because I want them to have enough of a mindset that the world is their home, that it's not about India, it's not about the US, it's about the world. Because in a way, we're all sitting slightly blind and blinkered on this planet today. I feel a little bit like we're sitting on the Titanic in the captain's cabin, enjoying a black tie dinner with a beautiful band playing, having some wonderful food, and under the deck there are people starving, and we're heading towards an iceberg. So the clock is ticking, and if we don't actually start to get people that are aware of the overall planetary issues and have the wisdom to actually start to lead at that level, we're going to have many more problems in the years to come. The other thing that I think is very important is the cohort effect. So each one of these leaders on their own, I believe, will be leaders that we can look up to and admire at different levels of success in the external world, and hopefully great success in the internal world. But I think the power of these young people working as a collective voice is going to be something that can actually move the needle. And so that is what we aspire to. And so we have conferences in India once a year. We're starting our first conference in the US next year. We have campus clubs at each campus where we want these young people to engage constantly in a discourse about what leadership really means, and to grow and to contribute on that path. When I look at, from my small position, the world, I come from India, I live in Delhi, and when one sits in Washington, India is one place on a map where, I understand Washington is probably the most global of the places in the US, with New York and maybe San Francisco, Los Angeles. But at the end of the day, the principal issues concerning people here are domestic issues. But I just want to give you the scale of the issues that a country like India faces today. We have 1.2 billion people. By 2050, we'll have 1.5 billion people. So another US population will be born and created in our country. 700 million people are going to move from rural to urban life in the next 35 years. That's almost 2.5 times the population of the US. It's going to move to cities. 100 new cities or more are going to have to be built with all the needs for energy, for water, for food, for security, etc., etc., etc. The scale of the problem is immense. And if we don't collectively work together on all these problems, sitting in the captain's cabin is not going to protect us from the challenges on the planet. And that's talking about India, which has a pretty good growth rate and is doing fairly well. If you look at the Middle East today and what's happening in places that all of you read about every day, or you look at Africa with Ebola and those kinds of terrible scourges on the planet, if you look at the intolerance in many parts of the world, where are the leaders who are going to step up to the plate to actually deal with these issues? From my point of view, looking at the world, I don't see the leaders. I see a huge leadership vacuum, a moral vacuum of leadership, and nature abhors a vacuum. And so, who steps into that vacuum is the question. Is it ISIS, or is it leaders that actually are able to work together as a team to actually move the needle in a positive way in terms of tolerance, acceptance, and the values that I love in the US, many of the great values that the US has. So, it's a big issue, and I'm devoting now half my life and my time to this work. I think it's very important work. And I'm here really to say to all of you that it's not my work, and it's not the work of our foundation, but it's really our work. It's the work of every single person in this room to think about this work deeply. Because the truth is, the Industrial Revolution and capitalism has really only helped 3 billion people out of 7 billion people on the planet. There are 4 billion people, 2 billion living on less than $1 a day, another billion living on $2 a day. And honestly, they're outside our visibility. 20,000 people die in a tsunami in India, and there's a small article in some newspaper. One person dies in a street shooting in Washington, and it's 2 pages in the newspaper. I understand why that is, because it's the local community. But all of us have to rise above that and look at the world now. And we need leadership from Washington. We need leadership. I always say that I wish the world had a 10% vote in the US elections. Because suddenly the US would say, oh my God, we better talk to the rest of the world about what we're doing in this country. Because the US has such a huge impact on the world. And Georgetown has such a huge impact on the world. And so, we see you as partners on this journey. We want to work with you in any way we can. Help us to identify leadership talent that we can groom together and mentor together to actually do the things that need to be done on the planet. We have 20 million people a year in India that need to be educated. We don't have enough teachers. Just in the state of Uttar Pradesh, we have 60,000 teachers, less than we need. How are we going to deal with these issues? If I was a young person living in a small village in India, I would be a very angry young person, because I would feel that the world has not delivered to me a fair deal. And if you have lots of angry people, as you do in many parts of the world, you will have the type of things we're seeing on the planet today. So I urge all of us to actually spend and dedicate time, energy, resources in a focused and thoughtful way to think about the bottom of the pyramid systematically, to think about education systematically, to think about globalization, not from the point of view of our country or our community, but from the point of view of all of us as a human family. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very inspiring. As the format of this, I was thinking of asking a couple of questions and then opening it up to the audience. If I may, though, as you were speaking, something I was thinking about was here at Georgetown, we are in the process of thinking a lot about the future of the university. You know, there is an active dialogue amongst students, amongst professors, amongst our administration, to think really critically about who we are and, you know, what should the university of the future look like? Should it attract different types of people? Should there be different types of, you know, outside of this traditional 2-year, 4-year undergraduate or graduate degree? Should we consider people? What should our curriculum look like? And how do we have more agency, the ability to influence the world? So I was wondering if you could speak a little more to those issues. We can learn a lot from you.
Well, I don't think you learn anything from me, but I can share certainly my views on the issue. I think that I'd say 2 things. Number one, I think the world realizes the preeminence of the US higher education system. The US has done a fantastic job over the last couple of 100 years building a global education system where academic freedom is respected, there's tolerance for diversity, where the highest research takes place, where the best students on the planet desire to come. I stood in line 3 days to get my visa rejected when I got into Brown, until my father then called the ambassador and got me a visa, and I felt it was very unfair because lots of young students get rejected and aren't able to come and take advantage of this great opportunity. That's one side of it. From the planetary point of view, and I apologize for not looking at it from the point of view of what should a university do, but from the other point of view, what do we need to do for the people on the planet? I think the issues are slightly different. I think that the issues at the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid need to be looked at slightly differently. At the bottom of the pyramid, I think, and I hope and I pray that technology and hybrid models of community involvement may allow the ability for massive change over the next 20 to 30 years, because it's needed and critical. Salman Khan Academy now reaches 400 million people on the planet. That's an amazing thing. And I believe that these models are now going to really flourish as we get more and more broadband access to every village, to every town over the next few years, mobile telephones, etc. So I think that is what's going to happen in terms of literacy generally, we hope. One of our students, one of these tGELF scholars, was in an interview with us a couple of years ago. And he came into the interview having got into 6 Ivy League schools and MIT on full scholarship. And we said to him, look, why are you here? He said, I want to be part of your tGELF community because I think you're doing a very valuable thing. And we said, well, we're delighted, and where do you want to go? He said, I want to go to Stanford. And I said, why? He said, because I want to be in technology. So I said, why do you want to be in technology? He said, because I said, you want to be in technology because you want to be like Bill Gates, you want to be like Steve Jobs and make lots of money, and don't forget to give something back to India eventually. And he said, no. And he looked at me seriously and he said, sir, I could do that, but that's not my destiny. So I said, okay, so what's your destiny? And he said, sir, my destiny is we are at an inflection point in history. Because for the first time, the best professor at Georgetown will be able to teach a villager in a small village in Uttar Pradesh. In the next 10 years, that will become possible. And for him to see that and say, that's where I want to dedicate my life. I want to move the needle on that one point. And he's now at Stanford doing fantastically well. So I think his vision is not far from what could be a vision of what needs to happen on the planet. So it becomes pull, where people start pulling the education they want towards themselves and going through that in a modular fashion. Do I believe that the infrastructure of universities is going to get totally, become irrelevant? I don't, because I think the interaction of faculty, students, graduate students, and the community is critical and allows one to develop one's capabilities in an experiential way and makes the learning much more rich. At the same time, I believe that will remain because of the huge cost of that system, something that not everyone can access. I hope more people from the bottom of the pyramid are able to access it and that there's more fairness and diversity. But I certainly think that that's not going to be the predominant model when 700 million people are going to move to cities in the next 35 years in India. We just can't build enough universities. We just can't get enough faculty. It's just not going to happen. So there needs to be another model. And I think it's going to be very deeply connected to technology, collaboration, multidisciplinary learning, and people pulling the type of learning they want to them through these different means.
My second question, before I open it up to everybody, was to pick up on the theme of the social impact of your foundation's efforts. So you told an amazing story of the school children in Chennai who wanted to change how they select their leaders. Just now you talked about the importance of investing and rolling out new technology. Are there specific areas where your foundation is eager to see social impact in the fellows who you are investing in?
So honestly, we started off with the issue, the thought was, where can our foundation have social impact? And we said health. There's a lot we can do in health. We worked with Gates Foundation and set up Public Health Foundation in India. And it's doing great things in India. We looked at education. We had set up Indian School of Business in India, for example, a number of schools and other things. We looked at the environment. We worked with Terry on various projects. And as we looked at all of these things, and we saw the scale of the problems, we realized that the highest impact, social impact we could have was actually training the human resources that need to address the issues going forward. So if we can create enough human resources and train that human resource cadre adequately with partners around the world, we need to allow those young people then to tackle the huge social issues on the planet over the next 20 years. I know that Olga Maria and Alberto have set up the Beck Center here for social impact and innovation. I was very honored and delighted to be invited to attend the event, their board meeting this morning. And they're doing very, very important work. And I believe that, and I said this to them this morning, that they're in Washington. They have a mouthpiece to the world. And it's a unique opportunity to actually experiment in this laboratory for social innovation, take the best ideas and then try and scale them on a global basis and have scale impact. Because the problem with social innovation often is small things happening in little silos in different parts of the world. And people are reinventing the wheel. And a lot of it is ego-driven by leaders that are doing little things here and there. But that doesn't move the needle. How do we move the needle? How do we educate 20 million kids every year in India? How do we do that? We need entrepreneurial leaders who have enough wisdom and competence to be able to do that at scale. And so our job and our commitment is to work to find those leaders and to basically hand over the problem of solving these issues to them.
Please, the floor is open for questions. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself before the question, we'd be thrilled to know who you are.
Thank you so much. My name is Craig Herb. I'm with a global NGO, Room to Read, and I see a huge need in the social sector of the kind of leader you're talking about. But before I went to Room to Read, I was about 25 years at Microsoft, and I also saw a huge need there for that same kind of leader. So, and I saw all those leaders at Microsoft save the altruistic element. And do you think because of the profit motive of for-profit corporations, that leader, that holistic leader that you're talking about, won't map back to that for-profit sector? Or do you see it as a social sector leader predominantly?
Thanks, Greg. I think that's an excellent question. And what we tell our young leaders is that we don't want them to be social sector leaders. Because the problem is not the social sector. The social sector has lots of leaders who are altruistic, ethical, and trying to do good things in the social sector. We need these leaders to go into the sort of land of Darth Vader and start to create light and change and rise to the top and figure things out, not have fear and actually change things. So we need these people to go to Goldman Sachs and to go to GE and Microsoft and wherever else and start to change the culture. And you need enough, there's a tipping point. You need enough leaders of that mindset to go into these organizations to create the change. And so that's why we think this is very important, and you asked a very important and critical question. And politics, very important.
Hi, thanks, Shiv. Rebecca Winthrop from the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. And I wanted to pick up on your last comment, not this last question, but your comment about scaling. And it makes total sense to me. You want to build the leaders of tomorrow so they can scale solutions. But my question is, what about scaling your intervention? How are you thinking about scaling the work you're doing? You're reaching 1 million kids. It strikes me, I know from past conversations, that your work is incredibly important. And the problem, I think, because we look at a lot of education systems in the developing world, predominantly in middle-income countries, low-income countries, is that there's great innovations, but it never gets mainstream. And this seems to me to be something incredibly important that should be mainstream everywhere, in every country. So how are you guys thinking about doing that is one, and if there's a second question related to that, which we've been doing a lot of research recently on this question of scaling, and scaling in education that we talk about, meeting basic needs as well as supporting global citizens. And one of the things we've come to the conclusion of, and we're working with like 60 ministers of education around the world, is that unless you can measure it, it's very hard for them to shift and mainstream their policies. So how would you even go about measuring something like this, particularly on global citizenship?
Thanks, Rebecca. So for full disclosure, Rebecca and I just spent 3 days together in Dubai. We're both on the Global Agenda Council for Education for the World Economic Forum, 20 of us, and we're spending 3 days trying to figure out how to solve the world's problems and then go back to our day jobs. But Rebecca's asked 2 very important questions. The question of measurement is something we think about a lot, and we're trying to work out how do we measure impact and change in the type of work we're doing. Because it's not about literacy. Can the person read another book? It's about looking for people that have certain set of values and are willing to live their lives according to those values on an ongoing, long-term basis. So clearly this has to be something that has to be measured over a number of years, number one. Number two, the little wins along the way need to be documented, like what happened at the school in Chennai, what is happening across we have many stories and testimonials. And you'd be surprised, Rebecca, at how many governments and ministers and so on are welcoming the type of intervention we are talking about. So the government of Rajasthan has now said they want all their schools to have our program. The ministry in India is saying they want to figure out how we can scale. We're in 11 countries. The model for us of scaling is to find partners and a partner infrastructure in every country we go to that allows us to scale. We give the curriculum away for free. We're putting everything online so we can train, but it needs to be a hybrid model. Just putting it online doesn't do it. But we need to give the content, and then we need people there who will create enough training. Because really what it is about looking for a certain type. Number one is talking about these issues and changing the discourse broadly, which is more about teacher training and constant reinforcement of these values and issues. And the second thing is about actually identifying these young people that can be then trained, hopefully, in a more concentrated, focused manner. Fortunately, we have the US universities, which will do that well for 4 years, as long as we keep pulling them back from drinking the Kool-Aid. Because when they go to Wharton, for example, I'm on the board of Wharton, so I can say this, the highest level of achievement is to join private equity or to go to Google and start a startup and make $1 billion. And we keep putting these young people back and saying, if all you do is become a partner at Goldman Sachs and make $100 million, for us you would have failed. Our expectations for you are much greater than that. Yes, you can do that, but that's not good enough. And by setting those expectations, hopefully, we're starting to work on that. Ashoka Fellows, again, as mentors, Ashoka is doing wonderful work. There are lots of people that are doing this kind of work on the planet, but I don't feel people are joined up enough, and there are too many silos. So I think that's a way of scaling up, another way of scaling up. But the thing that I'm quite passionate about, and we discussed at the Global Agenda Council on Education, and please, anyone who wants to join us on this path, please, you're welcome, is we want to build a Silicon Valley to be able to scale up education ideas on a global basis. What that means is to go around the world, put together in each country, it's a labor of love, in each country, the organizations, the government ministers, the people in the bureaucracy, the entrepreneurs who are passionate about intervening in education. And looking at all the models of what people are doing across the planet, and then trying to create a spirit of collective action, where you've created a runway where this Silicon Valley will then work to make sure that one plane at a time takes off. So one great idea scaled globally to change, to intervene in something. And then the next idea, and then the next. And then why not multiple ideas? But the point is, if everyone on the planet was working on the issue of child literacy, everyone that's spending their money, even for 1 year, if everyone on the planet put their money, it's like a distributed computer model, a computer system. If everyone on the planet took 1 year and said, we want to solve the problem of illiteracy on the planet, whether it's Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, the White House, the Indian Ministry of Education, I know we could crack these puzzles. The problem is there's no joined up thinking. Everyone's doing their own thing. There's no sense of collective action. That's what we need.
Hi there, my name is Steven Yin, and I'm a sophomore here at the School of Foreign Service. And I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned companies such as Goldman Sachs and GE, because I actually would like to work at Goldman Sachs.
Do it.
My question to you, sir, is that you talk a lot about having certain qualities of leadership, including altruism and ethics. And at the same time, you also talk about having, about developing enough of these leaders and putting them in these arenas such as GE and Goldman and other companies so that they can promote these values. How do you sort of balance the challenges of having, of of increasing the amount of these leaders while also preserving the quality of their leadership program through the program, through leadership development through the program?
I think that's a very important and good question. One leader can make a huge difference. If that leader has the deep strength of a Gandhi or a Mandela or any of these type of people. So don't underestimate what a great leader can do, point number one. You don't need many, many, many of them. Imagine our planet with 1,000 Mahatma Gandhis. It would be a different planet. So on a planet of 7 billion people, 1,000 Mahatma Gandhis would make a huge difference. So it's not necessarily about numbers, it's about quality. It's about to resist the system. I read a book every year called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a very meaningful book to me because what it says is that in the situation where everyone is stripped of their identity completely, their clothes, even their teeth, in a concentration camp, where you have absolutely nothing left, where it's each for himself kind of an atmosphere that's built, that even in that very depressing and depraved circumstance, a few people stood out who had ethics and altruism. We're looking for those people. Where are those people? But not everyone is like that. Everyone can improve, everyone can become more ethical, more altruistic, more leader-like, and have more of a bias for action. But we're looking for people that have a deep affinity to that, because they see that as more important than their external work and survival. So for us, quality is paramount. So I don't think we want to sacrifice quality for scale. At the same time, it's a bit like yeast. With the right yeast, you can make lots of yogurt. But if the yeast is spoiled, the yogurt will get bad. So getting that yeast right is very important, because then it will start to propagate itself. So the key is right now getting the yeast right, getting that core group of people that are deeply committed to a life of inner strength as well as external action and impact. And we know that it'll be a normal curve. There'll be some people there that hopefully will meet up to those high standards, many who will be strong and great leaders, and some who will fail, but that's fine. We have no secret formula for success. Actually, the group itself, as it develops, will start to create its own momentum and start to find people and attract people to it that share the values. That's already happening in India. We see people coming out of the closet who are closet altruists and closet ethical people. But they don't want to show that because they're alone in that environment. But we see that happening of all ages. So we want those people to come together and have a collective voice in terms of what we need. We also need a global conscience. That's not an institution, but it's a voice of certain quality of morality that says, look, we all need to get together and do something about this.
In the interest of time, I'm wondering if we can take a cluster of questions and respond to them.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. My name is Reed Howard. I'm a sophomore here in the School of Foreign Service. And this year is given the privilege of being asked to lead a leadership development team at Georgetown that's going into DC high schools to teach leadership skills, ethics, altruism. And my thinking is, we're a silo. So, and I know of other programs across the United States that are very siloed but doing great work. So my question for you is, how do we connect to organizations like you're talking about to have that impact, and how do we create these siloed organizations that are all across the country into this network, and what does that look like?
Thank you so much for being here. The way you described the way you select leaders, it seems very clear that not everyone can be a leader. And I guess in that sense, I'm interested in the antipode, right? What is the responsibility of the follower?
or if one is sort of stuck in follower status, what is the responsibility to create that global community? Is it a top-down thing? Is it that we look at the example of our leaders and we emulate them? Or is it, I mean, what is a follower to do, essentially, in this environment where only some people can be leaders? Is it just our responsibility to support them and support their ideas, or is there action that followers can take as well?
So my question is, when you have these partner institutions, how is it operationalized in a very practical sense? Which is that, is it integrated into an existing curriculum? Do they meet separately for some time? Is it a separate teacher, student, mentor, anything? So I'm actually trying to see from within an institution that to get fired up with these ideas, where do I take it from them? How does it actually happen? Thanks.
And so touching on the leadership development thing we were talking about, I think a lot of programs, especially with teams, and we recognize that one of the biggest challenges is our self-worth. Because kids know what's the right action to take, they know to step up, but so I'm not worth it, I can't. So how would you tackle that? And also, I'm wondering, can you just give like 2 or 3 specific actions like for our greater students to take? Like, you should start doing this like in order to become a greater leader. It's specific actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great questions. So let me just try and answer those to the best of my ability. Read, right? So, Read, your question, I think, clearly organizations like ours, we're very happy to help in any way we can. Jay is here on campus, connect with him, and anything we can do to help, we're happy to do. But I think you've identified a very critical point, and it's the type of point that someone like you could take up as a mission, to actually break down the silos and connect all the people doing that kind of work. And that's the type of thing we're trying to do right now. So you've identified a very important problem, and leadership is about doing something about it. Saying, okay, I want to actually start breaking down all these silos, connecting all the dots. And with technology, you are now able to do things you could never do before, right? Communicate, connect, share, many other things, collaborate. So that would be my advice to you, because people are doing very interesting things, but in silos. You need to break those down and try and do the best we can. Your question on followership and leadership, I think it's a very, very critical and important question. So let me spend a few minutes on this. To me, real leadership is about inner leadership. It's not about external leadership. If you saw Mahatma Gandhi, he didn't really care at all about external leadership. It was irrelevant to him. The only thing he cared about was, am I able to lead myself as a human being with integrity, truth, honesty, living by my conscience, etc. When he died with his loincloth, his walking stick, the 3 monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, his glasses and a Bible, a Quran and a Gita. Because his only thing that he really cared about was his inner world. And so leading from the inside out is what it's about. So when you say followership, I don't know what that means in that context. Because real leadership starts from within. So if you want to lead, first start leading from within. Lead a life of integrity and of inner discipline and inner self-worth. Whatever your spiritual tradition, whatever your tradition is, start with that. In terms of the external world, leaders who emerge in that context are people who don't want to be leaders. They're servant leaders. They want to serve. Because as they realize that they are deeply connected to the rest of the world, they are not there. Gandhi never became president of India. He never became prime minister of India. He didn't want to do that. He said, I need to serve the people. So that is what it's about. Also, great leaders are naturally great followers. So I think followership and leadership loses its meaning if one looks at it from the lens of an internal worldview. So lead from the inside out would be my recommendation to those people. Followers, of course, leaders need people to support them. Mahatma Gandhi would not have succeeded without millions of people supporting him, following him, guiding him, not necessarily committing to that huge degree of sacrifice and self-work that's required to be that kind of a leader. So Yes, if you see leaders that you look up to, leaders in this context, not those rah-rah leaders, but if you see leaders who are deeply committed to service, then follow them. Because you will actually be doing yourself a great service and you'll be serving a greater cause. So that would be my answer to that question. In terms of how can one operationalize and get involved, I think Ms. Ishwaran, I'll ask her to answer that question because, as I say, I talk a lot, but I have no clue how she does the magic at the school levels. She really does that. In terms of self-worth, I can't, and what actions would I recommend? The action I would recommend is start the inner journey. You know, unfortunately, there are not very many people who can teach us the inner journey. And that's a big shame. There are lots of people who can teach us about the external journey. Lots of people. You can learn about finance, accounting, how to be an entrepreneur, how to be a politician, how to learn about foreign policy, X, Y, Z. But when you say, I want to learn about myself, there's some psychology, but frankly, it still remains very cerebral. It's all at the level of the intellect. When you go to Zen, for example, which is an ancient tradition from our parts of the world, Asia, they ask questions like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Why do they ask that question? What are the koans? I did Aikido. I'm the chairman of the Indian Aikido Federation. I meditate every day. Why? Because actually you realize that the rational mind has its role, but beyond that, you need to shut down the rational mind to actually start a real journey of inner learning. So whether it's meditation, whether it's silence, whether it's some kind of spiritual practice in your own tradition, don't shy away from that. Take that seriously. You are at a Jesuit university, founded by the Jesuits. For 450 years, they were able to build a huge set of institutions on the planet and change higher education and education more than anyone else on the planet as a community. I remember reading about how St. Ignatius and all the early St. Xavier and so on selected their leaders. They didn't select their leaders by saying, oh, let me look at your resume. They said, okay, we're going to meditate, we're going to go into silence and pray for 3 days and see what answer comes about the next leader. What does that mean? So the point is, that there is beyond the rational mind. There is something beyond the rational mind. Read Gandhi, read Mandela, read even Einstein. People that were deeply rational, and they talk about the beyond, and that is where great leadership starts. So that's the action I would say. Please start that in some way. Ma'am, if you'd answer the question about how you operationalize these things, that would be good. Thanks.
Okay, I'll do my best to answer that. We have worked very hard in the last 10 years to put together a curriculum based on the tenets, and I'd like to mention a few of them. We don't preach because children today don't like anybody preaching to them. But
Stand up, it's easier.
And so we are focused on what makes sense to young people today. What do they see in the world around? For example, you have conflicts, you have ethical dilemmas, you have collaboration, you have teamwork. These resonate. But if you look at them carefully, they are underpinned by all the values that we hold dear. Because you can't have a team without integrity, without trust, without tolerance, without the ability to listen. You cannot deal with the ethical dilemma unless, like Shiv has mentioned, you are centered inside and there are values that you hold dear. So the curriculum has been architected and developed around all these issues. We started with grades 8 to 12, but we discovered that it was maybe a little late, so we're going to start in the coming year from kindergarten. And I would like to mention here that this is about the only program in the world which is sustained and reinforced over the years. It's not a one-time camp or a one-time talk or a one-time seminar. It is something that is sustained over the years. And any child who goes through this program through 4 years, 5 years, there's some kind of an impact left behind. Maybe they don't all, it'll answer somebody else's question here, maybe all don't become leaders, but some of them, some of what we have taught will remain with them. And to execute and operationalize this, we train the teachers from different schools. We have got master trainers. We've already trained over 2,500 teachers. and now we hope to go online so that we can reach even further. And India has more cell phones than any other country in the world, so our mobile app will go live very soon also. I hope that answers your question.
I'd like Jay to answer. He went through the program for 5 years, so he can talk a bit about what it was like from his perspective.
Great, welcome.
Yes.
So, thank you. So, I think the way the curriculum is designed is, I think teaching leadership as such overall is, leadership is a concept which you can help nurture and is a concept which you can help bring to the forefront and bring to the discourse. And that's what I think my 5 years of going through the curriculum. I don't think you get clear answers of exactly what you should be doing when you go through this curriculum, because the way it's been cultivated, and if I'm not wrong, is to actually make you think. So at each stage, for example, I think the question of who a great leader is and the definition of leadership as such, and when you think of that, you think of Gandhi, you think of the other side, you think of Hitler, and in their own way, Hitler was a leader, in his own way Gandhi was a leader, but what comes with leadership? Whether is it just a group of people following you, is it a group of people who actually follow you for a certain cause? Does the cause matter? And those are issues which are trying to get to the forefront with the tGELF curriculum. So the aim is to actually engage and get debate on these pertinent issues, which I feel is that, today what leadership is something which isn't discussed in the classroom. At least back home in India, the school I went to, it wasn't discussed. Everyone talks about great leaders, everyone is people they admire, but what makes a great leader is something which isn't addressed at all. And I think this curriculum has been designed in such a way to actually talk about, and not just every module, every aspect of the curriculum isn't just about a leader, but it's about finer points, about issues facing the world. And when you look at those issues facing the world, everyone has a different list of priorities, but there's a core group of issues which matter, and there's a core group of issues which you would say are not as important as the first. So it's in different ways trying to subtly influence your thinking and build not necessarily a consensus, but a pathway towards talking about these issues and getting them on the forefront, because everyone's approach is different. Today I may be really interested in politics, someone else may be really interested in medicine, someone else. So it isn't actually telling you leadership and your impact in the world can only be quantified through a certain way or can be done through a certain path. What it's actually saying is in each of these ways, there's a way to be ethical, there's a way to actually evaluate what you're contributing, and your contribution can be, you could be at Goldman Sachs for instance, but there is a definition of leadership which you should be thinking about even while you're at Goldman Sachs. So I think that's the more broad perspective that the curriculum brings to you.
On that note, please join me in thanking our guests for today as Khemkas. Thank you so much for inspiring us, motivating us, and making us all think a little bit about our own inner journey. Thank you.